The Philosopher's Tale. Really? It all came down to style. Sammy stepped their way confidently across the small stage towards the podium, wingtips clacking out each step. They were great shoes, comfortable and loud, though not quite as loud as the tap shoes Sammy had worn as a kid, with plenty of broguing. The black leather contrasted well with white spats and the blinding brightness of Sammy's suit. The tux had been a gift from Stace, who'd done a bit of work on it to make sure it hugged Sammy's slim frame perfectly. It certainly did the job, and they could delight in the stares they could feel bouncing off their butt like smut lasers. Classy and comfortable. What was significantly less comfy was the podium. Sammy barely cleared 1.5 meters on a good day, and this was not going to work. They jumped a few times, feeling their bleached puffball of hair bounce, but that didn't accomplish anything except get some laughter from the audience. There was a kind of shelf thing at the bottom of the podium. Maybe they could balance on that. Sammy was saved from what would undoubtedly be one of Shill's funniest home videos by one of the twins. Having groupies was awesome, and Caslin whispered a quick apology as she folded down a step stool from the podium and backed off. It wasn't satisfying at all compared to the thought of scaling the thing, though it did provide the necessary altitude. Dang it! Now Sammy wanted to climb something. They surveyed the room quickly, locking eyes with Marin. Target acquired. Sammy winked at the tall, lanky Shilvanti, who blushed a deep blue in response. Tonight, Marin would be their Matterhorn. First, though, there was speechy stuff to do. Reaching forward with one thin, dark-skinned hand, Sammy grabbed the microphone on the podium and pulled it closer. It obligingly let out a squeal that shut down the last of the conversation in the room. Everyone turned and gave the little physicist their full attention, and Sammy leaned forward into the mic. They leaned back, then began the laborious process of patting their pockets. I have some note cards. Waka 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 waka. Sammy sheepishly reached into an inner pocket of their tuxedo jacket and pulled out the offending device. It was a Game Boy Light, the extremely rare Pokemon Center Tokyo exclusive Pikachu edition, and sporting the Pac-Man module. Questing for Great Truce had found it years ago, during one of her Japan trips to get vintage electronics for her online show, and it had become a mainstay in Sammy's EDC pile. After taking a moment to look appropriately embarrassed, Sammy switched it off and placed it on the podium. Sorry, I was trying to beat my highest score in the bathroom earlier. The pocket patting resumed to more laughter and muted applause, before Sammy came up with a small stack of Robin's Egg blue index cards. Okay, for real this time. They glanced down at the first card. In bold black marker across the center, it simply read, Introduction. That made sense. Sammy surveyed the crowd. The non-scientists out there probably couldn't give half a shit about the Earth or humanity, or even science in general. It was a social event, which meant plenty of people who had never even heard of their little band of weirdos. That was easy enough to remedy. My name is Dr. Sammy Painter Forsyth, and I am here today to accept the Science Prize on behalf of myself, my husband, Dr. Samuel Forsyth Painter, and everyone at the Painter Research Institute. It is truly an honor. Sammy flipped the index card over their shoulder and onto the floor, revealing the next. It read, Why? In blocky capital letters. The one question we have been asked more than any other is why? At first, it was in the context of the Shilvanti. Why help the enemy? Murmurs began to sound around the room while Sammy let the question stew. And yes, I'm not going to stand up here and pat your flaps and tell you that the Shilvanti invasion of Earth was a good thing. It sucked. We all lost a lot of friends and family, and in a matter of moments we were reduced from an up-and-coming species, forging our own destiny, to being known galaxy-wide as the planet of the Himbos. Even after things settled down, the entire human race fell into a sort of depression. It was economic as well as social. These were not good times for anyone. Sammy raised a hand to straighten their glasses, noticing how captivated the audience had become. They had been planning to half ignore a speech, not get dunked on. It was a shitty time to be a scientist. Entire fields of study were wiped out, either because the shill already had the answers you had spent your life looking for, or your specialty was suddenly considered verboten. Sammy blinked, then leaned closer to the microphone. That means forbidden, by the way. At the time, Sam and I were running a little observatory and planetarium in the mountains. Like most scientific installations, the coming of the Shilvanti Empire meant the destruction of our careers. Nobody wanted to look at the stars anymore. It was worse than that, really. Curiosity seemed to be dying. It was... Sammy sniffed, pausing to dab at an eye with a corner of their shirt sleeve. It was a very rough time for all of us. Coming back to research meant more than just making a buttload of money. It meant helping dispel the miasma of depression that seemed to be hanging over the human race. It meant helping people. Winning the Imperial Science Award shows that humanity can be recognized and appreciated for what we are capable of. That we aren't just good soldiers and sex pets, but capable and dedicated sapiens who have a lot to give to the galaxy at large. The money is pretty cool too, don't get me wrong. I mean, we've got one of those pools at home where it pushes the water at you so you can swim forever. That's pretty sweet. Sammy nodded towards the crowd and noticed a few nods in return. It was nice to have infinity pool money. Another index card flickered to the floor, and Sammy glanced down. "Thanks" was written on the card, and for just a moment they had to stifle an urge to whisper, "You're welcome," back at the piece of blue cardstock. We couldn't have done this alone, of course. Right now, the Painter Research Institute has over 1,000 researchers, engineers, technicians, and other staff at our main campus. But even in the beginning, it wasn't just the two of us for long. House Chelksa and the Lone Caribou Survival Company provided the initial seed money that built our first real lab, so they need a mention. And I have a big list of names I'm going to run through double time, so none of you get bored. Sammy exhaled quickly, then pulled in a deep breath and a loud gasp. Marion, Iron, Electra, Stace, Dave, Jimsy, Chelsea, Questing for Great Truths, Keller, Toril, Rem, Askell, Jessica, Spreads the Word, Pellick, Visper. Sammy poured in another deep breath, ready to continue, but the audience was already starting to laugh. And a whole bunch of other people who will be getting a gift basket later. Sammy flicked the index card out of the way, then looked at the final one, still clenched between their fingers. They made a point of staring at it, holding it up in front of their face, before spinning it around. Party! Sammy waved a fist in the air, and received some cheers mixed in with the claps. They grabbed the Game Boy off the podium with a flourish, hopped down from their step stool, slid alarmingly as a smooth-soled dress shoe hit a discarded index card, recovered, bowed to the audience, and scampered off. The Philosopher's Epilogue. Security at the Northern Palace was growing thin, as Central moved 3 pods out to deal with the tidal wave of traffic clogging the roads, while 2 were dispatched to see Akarun Doskulo safely past the traffic jam, clogging the roads and back to the capital. The timing couldn't have been better. The palace security systems were capable, and dedicated to monitoring the whole of the palace complex, from its innermost rooms to the overwatch sensors set along the perimeter. Waka 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 waka. The microphones in the Great Hall picked up the sound. Having lain dormant in the servers for weeks, Sammy's virus took notice, and around the palace, things selectively began going offline. Tom applauded with the rest of the crowd as Sammy took another bow, but his mind was somewhere else. And that's 9. Now we see if this works. The Knight's Tale. At table 9, Her Royal Highness, Grand Duchess Orokiv of Greater Vidana on Sevastatav, poked at her cheese plate while waiting for the soup course. After a lifetime of service, she'd been looking forward to tonight. Before taking up her family title, her career in astrophysics had led her to some remarkable discoveries, measuring false vacuum states in dark energy, and she'd been thoroughly looking forward to this evening. The painters were fascinating. Their works were changing science across the Imperium, and more importantly, it had promised to be one of those rare occasions she could just be Dr. Orokiv Zahal and share some really good arguments with some very old friends. What a dull, vacuous affair. So far, the sole highlight of the evening was the address by Dr. Painter Forsyth, who was seated over at the royal table. She had hoped she might get to introduce herself, but the repressive sea of sycophants, hangers-on, and riffraff clogging the ballroom floor had turned an evening meant for serious academia into a social event. It was beyond irritating. She wasn't getting any younger, and she didn't have the time to suffer such people, though in truth she never had. Her assistant, Fanry, was seated to her right, while the crowd thronged about in a social hour as the appetizers were being served. Once the parasites in the crowd cleared out or settled down, she might be able to dispatch the woman over to make an introduction to the painters, or at least find Darsa Vagar. The old Rakiri was sure to be loafing around here somewhere. Darsa was a solid exoplanetary climatologist, and good company. Though with everyone milling about, yapping over mindless pleasantries, signifying nothing, who could tell where she was? Goddess love her, the old Grinshaw was doubtless being ignored by all these petty socialites, and ready to tear her fur out. Fanry was a good girl, though. A capable assistant. Perhaps she might have the endurance to wade through the crowd and bring her back for a chat. The waitress scurried up to the table, and Orokiv looked the girl over. Everyone was supposed to be assigned permanent waitstaff for the evening at an affair like this. The girl was the same size, but her face was different. The first girl had sharp features, without an ounce of extra weight on her, and she'd been agreeably terse, rather than fawning all over her. This new girl was pretty enough, with wide golden eyes and a heart-shaped face. It was a good wig, but under the dark bangs she had silver eyebrows. "I'm so very sorry, Duchess, but there's been a slight delay in the kitchen." The girl had a charming smile. Goddess, she was sick of charming smiles on useless people. "The soup will be out shortly." Fanry looked ready to speak up, but Orokiv laid a hand on her arm. Sevastopol protocol was punctilious, and her assistant had made a point of it with the first girl. A Grand Duchess ranked just short of a princess, and given Sevastopol's sensibilities, Fanry had gone to no small pains to make certain she was addressed as Your Royal Highness. It irritated the local twits to no end, so it was worth the effort. Still, if someone had swapped waitresses on her, it was possible someone was mucking about. While it could be mischief aimed at her expense, it was probably some pointless nothing. Still, it wouldn't hurt anyone to have some harmless fun. She might get a few minutes of serious discussion with Darsa later tonight, but at least she could amuse herself in the meantime. Much like the Cambrians, the Sevastotavian accent was a marvelous thing. Honed during the long period of isolation that Imperial ninnies still refused to call a war, as a matter of pride, her people had refined local slang and idioms into a patois all their own. While she could certainly speak both high and trade Vatica flawlessly, and had been all evening. "So, und where have you been, darling?" Orokiv speared the girl with a penetrating glare. "Who called his service? Und you will address me correctly, yes?" "Is this some insult to our people?" Orokiv watched Fanry rear up in outrage. Goddess love her assistant, she didn't miss her cue as she started in on the girl. "You will address my laddie as Your Royal Highness, yes?" Orokiv felt a brief titter of amusement. The girl looked like she'd run tusks first into a wall at speed. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Is there anything I can do for you until then?" "So much for that. I'm too old for this nonsense, and I really had been looking forward to talking with someone interesting." "Oh, Not unless you have anything interesting to say about the quantum fluctuations in the space-time, or can guess me an introduction to the pentatable. No? Oraki sniffed in exasperation and rode over any response. No? We thought not. Just serve the soup, girl, and we see if it's edible, yes? Well, actually, the doctors are on the verge of a huge breakthrough in inverse gravitational space-time distortions, utilizing cross-dimensional zero-energy states. The girl bounced up and down on her heels, grinning impishly. They'll be reaching across an ergosphere's secondary internal energy ring to harness stable bridges in inverse singularities. It had been a long time since anyone made Oraki blink. I heard it from the kitchen, from the girl working the royal table. The girl bit her lower lip and offered up a sickly smile. I could try and arrange an introduction, Your Royal Highness. She's a good friend. Oh, yes? Oraki regarded her waitress directly. The girl had just become rather more interesting. And while you are at it, did they say anything in the kitchen about harnessing sulfur strings across the 11-dimensional mana fields? And wouldn't that be the answer to a prayer? This evening might have possibilities after all. The night's epilogue. With Princess Qadira away from Shill, the support staff for the Northern Palace had been reduced substantially, and as soon as Letzi, Deshin and Zinshiki made their way into the emergency stairs of the kitchens, the noise of the palace fell away like another world. The automated lighting failed to come on. Putting her night vision to good use, Zinshiki took the lead going up. The malfunction was their sign that things were going to plan. Antiquated and drafty, Special Agent Qadira Zhe'riva's upper floor quarters had never been in a well-regarded portion of the building. The privacy suited Zhe'riva, and her few neighbors had become progressively more scarce since she'd taken occupancy. The trio took a moment to listen at the door before emerging and making their way through the lit corridors beyond, encountering no one. Buried in the palace systems for weeks, the virus started its work slowly. In control, the palace security operation deep in the first sub-basement, timed feeds along the girl's route began displaying video footage of darkened halls and empty corridors. It was a brief alteration which passed unnoticed by the women at their stations. Encountering no one from the palace staff during their brief walk, the trio made it to the apartment door with time to spare. Checking the time, Desala rolled her eyes at Letzi while Zinshiki raised an eyebrow. Dressed in elaborate formal coats, the shore girls looked perfectly at home as guests. Well, young guests, but still guests. Wrapped in a brightly patterned Helcom thermal shawl for a disguise, Zinshiki glowered miserably as they waited for the clock to wind down. Even in disguise, there was little they could say if a member of the staff or a security detail crossed their path. The Northern Palace was a relic of earlier times. Its support systems, however, had been modified time and again. They were state-of-the-art, and at precisely the right moment, the virus infesting the palace made its second move. Designed to help firefighters evacuate the building, magnetic door locks across the entire fourth floor went out. Moments later, the girls were inside, closing the door behind them with a sigh of relief before looking around. Letzi fished her Omnipad out and opened up the flashlight app from its camera setting, with Desala following suit. Zinshiki winced in the sullen glare as they cast their lights about to softly illuminate the small studio apartment. "This is it. It's tiny," Letzi said doubtfully as she peered around the living area. "I've seen bigger closets than this." "This will sleep 4 on my warband ship," Zinshiki muttered as she pulled off the shawl, her fur rippling in relief as she checked her skin suit. "Less is more," Letzi heard Desala grunt as she settled in at the desk omni in the far corner of the room. "Less to search means we have more time. Have a look around while I copy off the storage drive." Letzi opened the closet by the entry and ran a light over the contents, while Desala slipped the data drive from her coat pocket. The high-capacity chip had been brought in by Burdin Desari and contained his recipe book, the guest list for the evening, and everything else the chef might need to make the evening a success, which meant that it was essentially blank, and with plenty of room to mirror any downloaded files. We have a problem. Desala was shaking her head as she waved a hand at the terminal. This whole unit is blank as the day it was installed. It's still on its setup menu. Pausing in her examination, Lexi craned over to see. Wait, what? I don't know. Desala whispered back sharply, tapping at the console. I'm running a file check to see if the screen is a spoof and... No! Fuck me! This drive only has the operating system on it. There's nothing here. Sala, according to Zhe'riva's information, Agent Zhe'riva only works out of here. How can it be empty? It just is. We have to look everywhere. Desala pushed back from the desk Omni, setting the chair carefully back in place. Check the other room. We have less than 30 minutes left before the locks go back online. There must be something. If there isn't, this has all been for nothing. Lexi walked slowly into the attached bedroom, looking around, running her light around the room, and being careful not to disturb anything while Desala started checking the desk drawers. Zinchiki, check the bathroom? Fine. There's nothing to eat in here anyway, Zinchiki grumbled, her head deep inside the tiny pantry. Who's going to check the other room? Hey, could you maybe not think about food for... Desala snarled in frustration, her head somewhere around the base of the couch as she checked underneath. Wait, what are you talking about? I've been sealed in a shipping container half the day without eating. Zinchiki padded silently over. Pezhran have a very discriminating... Lexi stepped back into the room in time to see her friend regarding Zinchiki like she was going to strangle her. The Pezhran only blinked, twice. Would you please focus on the job and quit thinking with your stomach? What other room? I can do both. Zinchiki's Asaic flipped languidly as she pointed at the row of shelving that lined the far wall. And it's right there. Pezhran have excellent thermal vision and can see into the UV range. That third unit is a hidden door. Ladies. Lexi kept her cool as she tried to placate the pair. Or at least Desala. The Pezhran huntress seemed to be enjoying herself. Zinchiki, not to belabor the obvious, but why didn't you tell us? I was about to, as soon as Desala stopped complaining and ordering us around. Zinchiki stood stock still, flexing her finger claws as she regarded them coolly. It's only been a minute since she found nothing on the desk. I do not order people about. Desala's temper flared, but Lexi watched her agitation turn to excitement as they stepped over to the shelves. You know, this could be one of my aunts. She has a company that manufactures safe rooms and vaults. Well, that would be a stroke of luck, and it's starting to look like we'll need one, Lexi whispered, as she shone a light over the adjacent shelves and frowned at the contents. This is creepy. There's nothing on this one but row after row of empty picture frames. What kind of whack job does that? This is the woman who sent an assassin into your school. You should see the state of her pantry, Zinchiki whispered back. Lexi watched Desala shudder as the Pezhran went back to poking at the knickknacks on the other shelf. A clear sign of an unbalanced mind. Lexi never considered herself to be an expert on alien body language, but the tip of the Pezhran's Asaic was twitching. I don't care about the pantry. Desala brushed her hair back and was peering intently as she had bent over to lean in close, running her flashlight over the panels that separated the units. If this is just a door unit and not a safe room, there should be a trigger here somewhere. We just have to carefully look for an... Ow! Lexi canted ahead as the shelf unit sprang forward with a barely audible pop, smacking Sala squarely on the nose. On the other side of her, Zinchiki held up an ornamental sconce and shrugged. Right, fine. That's just perfect. Desala rubbed her nose as she stood up and glared at Zinchiki. Whatever you do, do not put the candle back. Lexi stood aside as Desala carefully slid the shelf along a hidden track and waved the flashlight inside. Okay, I was wrong. This is creepy. Lexi looked over the meager contents within the hidden room. There was a desk omni and very little else. For some reason, it was the little else that bothered her more. Let's do what we have to and get out of here. The Monk's Tale. Special Agent Lamana Davari surveyed the room as dinner was served. A light eater, the appetizer and soup courses had been more than enough. The spicy red soup of herbs and something called tomato had been pleasantly zesty, and more than enough to satisfy. Rather than linger for the main course, she stayed out on the floor, blending into the crowd of mingling assorted nobles and assorted mob of social limpets. The academics are eating like it's the first full meal they've had in a month, or maybe they just have more sense. It was still something of a relief. She'd been trapped on campus for months in her cloying role as Professor Davari, a bubbly woman who gushed over inane conversation and tended to giggle. As much as she loathed the role, it was a useful cover for her work, and she'd adopted the personality in prior operations. Traitors and criminals had underestimated or dismissed her out of hand, to her delight, and their lasting regret. That didn't mean it wasn't a relief to shed the persona for the evening and just be herself. There were times when she wondered who that self even was, but the work always came first. She was a special agent of the interior, and she had a job to do. If strolling about the room with a decent drink allowed her to watch Princess Qadira and her table, so be it. As much as she wanted to be checking the operation as events unfolded, this is where she was expected to be the special agent, carefully watching over her charge. Nothing going on, nothing to see here. The Academy's hidden bunker could comfortably house up to 12 commando teams. Even with Tala's fourth pod of EWIT experts, the facility was essentially empty. Despite the attempt on Qadira's life, questions had been quietly raised in certain quarters if Tasia was merely a rogue madwoman after Warwick. Regardless of the truth, the addition of Tala's team, and only one additional pod on the grounds, had proven to be the limit of Lamana's reach. As a ranking member of family security, Qadira Zhe'riva enjoyed full access to every report. As Davari's suspicions continued to mount, curtailing those reports effectively ended any window into Qadira's activities. Lieutenant Tala and her team had spent weeks running and rerunning checks on every system in the bunker, but rather than letting perfectly good woman power be reassigned, she'd held on to the woman. It had proven useful. On the face of it, the whole plan was inane. The very notion of using young women and all but untrained interior cadets to infiltrate an imperial palace was preposterous. That was also exactly why it might very well work. With 2 imperial princesses in attendance, the interior would be checking the backgrounds of every guest this evening, but would rigorously examine the records of anyone not on the palace staff. The heir to a well-regarded computer security firm, it seemed Desala Sehart was a prodigal daughter. Over the last 2 weeks, Tala had met with the girl and vouched for her skills. The entire plan was no more or less than simply causing a glorified mess to tie palace security in knots, all to put one person in the right place at the right time with the right skills. A qualified, talented girl who could walk right in, with no record as a trained professional. Davari glanced over at the head table, where the smaller half of the painter couple was bobbing their head up and down in animated conversation with one of the waitresses. The very existence of the painter virus ought to have them thrown into prison simply for creating it. It was even more galling that they'd come up with it on the flight here. They should be on a penal colony, or a weapons lab, but a sensible woman makes do with the tools at hand. Tonight, her tools included Tom Warwick. Attending tonight's event on his own, she'd taken the liberty of sweeping him away from a growing throng of women that threatened to swamp him, and no noble was going to argue with her, not while she wore the purple and gold of the interior. It could be considered a chivalrous act. Warwick looked quite dapper as his scarlet suit scintillated under the lights, and she felt a momentary elation at the jealous looks tossed her way when she'd stolen him away to promenade him around the hall. Keeping him in on her arm while they strolled the room was perfectly normal for events like these, and she surveyed the room as they walked. If Warwick looks nervous this evening, it doesn't matter. Even in polite company, an unescorted man would be... And I might as well admit I'm enjoying this. For his part, Warwick kept up his part of the charade, chatting about everything and nothing as they moved with the crowd. On a whim, she indulged her curiosity. Why do we call ourselves mankind? Warwick kept his arm in hers as they moved around a chattering group of dilettantes surrounding a dame. If house colours were anything to go by, the man on her arm was her husband, and the crowd of hopefuls were probably weighing up their status against a chance for a date. Two women glanced Warwick's way from head to toe, and she flexed her arms, showing off the gold insignia running down her sleeves as they moved on. Yes, Lamanna nodded, as they passed a small elderly group locked in conversation. Turned out in sober and understated dresses, they were likely academics, and she gave them a smile. I know your people call themselves mankind, or humans. Now you're part of the Imperium, will you rename yourselves? Rename ourselves? Warwick had the sense to look like he was enjoying himself, but his face contorted a moment. Rename ourselves to what? The main course had been served, something called a pasty. It looked appetizing enough, but 5 tiny courses weren't going to fill Shivanti's stomachs, enough to get people walking off dinner, and they had room to meander about the hall. Warwick was only a foot shorter than her, and she set her hand on his as she started them on another turn about the room. Womenkind, of course. Your population is still half women, and it would be more sensible, all things considered. Ah, well, Warwick was grinning sheepishly, and she used his hesitation to glance over his shoulder at the pod of palace death's heads on display at the door. There were only 12 pods in residence, with Comortry absent. There had been 3 pods around the room earlier, which meant Princess Indara's request must have been useful. There were probably 4 out on the perimeter, plus 2 or more tied up with the regular security teams, checking the vehicles now clogging the access roads. 1 would be manning operations. That only left 2 unaccounted for. Human comes from an old word, humanus, which meant belonging to a human. If Warwick noted the redundancy, he didn't mention it. As for mankind, the word man used to mean person until about 1,000 of our years ago, so mankind was just the race of people. It's not too different from the origins of Shivanti when you think about it. Lamanna considered the answer, as her eyes flickered back to the head table. Whatever his virtues or faults, Mever Pelavon had picked reasonably well. The man could hold his own on a surprising variety of topics, and much as she hated this plan, it seemed to be working out so far. Either way, gender had nothing to do with it until fairly recently. Warwick's attention seemed to waver as he watched a Rakiri with a dark, merled pelt being ushered their way. Lamanna looked their way and recognized the Kerbal girl under the wig. Falling back on old habits, she smiled and nearly giggled as she turned away, avoiding giving her undue attention. So, what was used for gender before? Well, the word for men was were. That's where you get holdover words in that language, like weregild and, Warwick paused, watching the elderly Rakiri pass by and move off to a table. Sorry, I need a moment to savor the irony. Irony? She canted her head, looking down at him. I'm afraid you've lost me. Werewolf. The corner of one lip curled up, uncertainly. Sometimes the universe tries extra hard to remind me I should be laughing. Werewolf. She repeated the word, committing it to memory. This is a humorous term in your language? Actually, no. It's a myth about humans who turned into horrific monsters. Just pure coincidence that they're supposed to look like Rakiri, so please keep that to yourself. I don't want to start a diplomatic incident, Warwick said, as they passed some distance from the nearest knot of people. I still wish I could laugh, though. Sometimes. I wonder if that's all the damage talking. Maybe I'm just not a good enough Taoist. There were no clocks on the wall, and she refused to look at her omnipad. It was just as well. There was nothing she could do to affect the events unfolding outside the hall. She had a moment to ponder the irony of humans who thought they weren't lethal, and to spot the approaching figure of Qadira Zhe'riva. Monsters indeed. "Why, my dear Special Agent Davari." Zhe'riva smiled as she came over, resplendent in her armored dress purples. "How very nice it is for us to welcome you to the Northern Palace, and with such a delightfully handsome man on your arm. The infamous Professor Warwick, no less, and in such a delicious suit. I hope you don't mind if I cut in." Warwick's face didn't betray a thing, but Lamanna felt his thumbnail press into her arm. "I'm sorry. I'm acting as a proxy since his wives were unable to attend. You know how it is." "How? I know." Zhe'riva's smile was a playful mew as she looked Warwick over like dessert. "Career women such as we can so seldom indulge ourselves. Surely one could not refuse a request on my part." "I'm afraid there's a need to refuse on my part. I'm helping to host this evening, and I'm afraid I'm needed in the kitchen." Warwick returned Zhe'riva's appraisal. It was bold for a man, but his smile was warm and it met his eyes. "I'll pass on your kind remarks. You look like Sauron in a corset." Zhe'riva batted her eyes when Warwick slipped into English. "One begs one's pardon, but what did that mean?" "I'm terribly sorry. I couldn't help but notice your attire this evening is particularly something. I'm afraid the words in Vatica simply failed me." Warwick's shrug was eloquent, if unpolished. "Please excuse me, ladies. I promised I'd check in with Chef Desari to see if I can help. I hope you have an unforgettable evening." Davari watched Warwick slip away, picking up steam in his stride, as a trio of women started to follow. "What an amusing little fellow." "Well, not so little either," Zhe'riva murmured. "He looked quite good on your arm, even if you're dressed down for the evening." "We serve at the pleasure of the Empress and the Princesses, though some of us have more zeal than sense." Davari turned to regard the woman, who was effectively playing hostess for the evening. "Why are you talking like that, by the way?" Zhe'riva cantered ahead, watching Warwick until he disappeared through the exit. "How? You think it unnecessary?" "Indeed," Lamanna breathed. "I believe I said so." "Well then, but you must tell me why." "I think I'd rather choke the life out of you if you keep it up," she replied convivially, giving Zhe'riva a smile. "So knock it off." "Very well. I must say that you have a reputation for being no fun, and a demeanor that's no fun, but I shouldn't have let that fool me. You really are no fun at all." "I'm not here to entertain you." "Oh, I wouldn't go that far." Zhe'riva turned to look at the royal table. "I'm finding this evening very entertaining." "She's baiting me. Nothing bad is going to happen in this room and around these people." "Your reputation precedes you." Lamanna adopted a similar pose, gazing over the crowd toward her charge. The crowd around them had moved on. The sight of two interior agents talking together had given them all an attack of good sense. "Your problem is you see people as things." "Oh, Special Agent Lamanna Davari. You have no idea how I see people." Qadira's smile grew sharp as she looked over the crowd, as if it were her hunting ground. "Tell me, have you called your mother recently? Mended the rift with your family? You're her first daughter, after all, and she isn't getting any younger." "Accessing my personal profile? You've been putting that level violet clearance to good use. And what about you, Special Agent Qadira Zhe'riva? I notice your mother taught you to speak so diplomatically." Lamanna had felt Zhe'riva's remark cut deep, but it was again too good play. She turned to face her hostess, her peer, her rival. "That must have been difficult, since by all reports she drove your father off. I assume you never really knew him." Zhe'riva's eye twitched, a look of raw fury passing over her for a moment. Then the moment was gone. Lamanna savoured it, all the same. There were 4 ways to call someone a bastard, and she just managed all of them at once. It's a shame Princess Kamori can't be here. I'm sure she'd have loved to be there with Princess Indara and Princess Qadira. So young. Zhe'riva's voice took on a convivial note. So vulnerable. However circumspect, and however deniable, the words were a declaration of war. There will be an accounting. There always is once there's a body, Lamanna said casually. Juwele Eterak, Arali Tejo, even Princess Atora. People have died playing this game. That's the one thing you can count on people to do. Zhe'riva's smile would have done Anna Dixie credit, but it had a brittle note, and her eye twitched again. But Satora, you really don't have a clue, and you seem far more comfortable using children than we are. Lamanna Davari looked at her enemy, and for the first time in years felt a shiver of fear slide through her heart. Does she know? She pushed the fear aside. Whatever happened, now was not the time to show weakness. We? Back to hiding behind pretense? Be quiet, Zhe'riva hissed, her eyes oddly unfocused before she came back to herself. I meant that. Whatever Zhe'riva had been about to say was cut off by the ping from her omnipad. It was a priority tone, and the woman swiped it open, glaring venomously. Muy foul. I've told you not to disturb me and... What do you mean there's movement on the perimeter? Dispatch the... Yes, fine. I'm on my way. You, get up here. We'll see if you're competent enough to handle our guests. Lamanna Davari watched her storm off through the crowd. The encounter had been instructive, in more than one way. Monsters are things people are scared of. But sometimes, monsters are things people aren't scared of, and should be. The monk's epilogue. Everything had gone to plan. Desala had accessed the second desk Omni, mirroring everything on the hard drive. The virus was on schedule. They had 8 minutes left before the whole building would start sliding into chaos. It should have been plenty of time. It would have been, except for the security team that had been standing just down the hall. They weren't desk heads, just regular palace security doing a random sweep. Possibly someone had found their door unlocked and called them up to the floor. Right now, it didn't matter. Zenshiki hissed quietly, her back pressed against the wall, as the one in the middle put a finger to her ear. Control, this is Team 6, up on the 4th floor in Corridor 14. The woman turned partially away, while the other 2 kept their pistols trained on her and the girls. It looks like we have a break-in. We have 2 women and... something furry with a tail? No, it's not a pet. The woman on the left rolled her eyes, snorting in amusement. It was a second's distraction, and Zenshiki moved. There were screams, and the hiss of lasguns. Then, there was only silence.